Hey guys, welcome to Spirit Pig. This is the show that explores how to live a fulfilled life. I'm Duncan CJ, and today I'm speaking with Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas is the author of Present Shock, When Everything Happens Now, and Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, How Growth Became the Enemy of Prosperity, as well as a dozen other best-selling books on media, technology, and culture, including Program or Be Programmed, Media Virus, and Life Inc. He's a professor of media theory and digital economics and made the television documentaries Generation Like, Merchants of Cool, The Persuaders, and Digital Nation. And he lectures about media, society, and economics all around the world. So, huge honor. Douglas, thank you so much for being here. Super exciting.
Oh, thanks for having me on Spirit Pig.
Now, often on these sort of interviews, I've got I do some prep and I've got a pretty sort of clear idea of sort of the flow often it will take. But here,
But
there's,
this
I
one you
mean,
did no prep whatsoever,
no,
and you
no, no.
just
I've
make
still done my prep. I've done my prep, but there's quite an eclectic different things, and so I mean, I'm not really sure where exactly this is going to go. But there's a couple of questions and stories and stuff which I'm gonna go along with, and so we'll see where we end up. But one
cool.
one thing I liked, I once heard you talking a bit about the history, where you started, a bit of your childhood, and you told this great story about sort of going to Sunday school and your conversation with a new rabbi. Could you maybe just could you maybe just share that?
Yeah, I don't know. But maybe that might have been formative. Yeah, I uh, I was a little kid. My brother went to Sunday school, and I wasn't old enough, but I wanted to do everything that he did. So I started Sunday school when I was in kindergarten. They stuck me in the first grade class, and I was, this little precocious little, I don't know what, iconoclast. And they had we lost our rabbi for some reason. Maybe he got old or whatever. And they had hired this new rabbi, this kind of young idealistic guy out of Canada. And he came around to all the Sunday school classes, to each grade, and he was like, "You ask me any question." It was sort of like a Reddit thing, Ask me anything. Ask me anything. So I went right to the heart. I said, "What is God?" And he got into this whole thing about, because he didn't want to talk about God being a character. So he was talking about the universe and that God is is sort of what it's how you know that there's sort of good that the universe is biased to good and not bad. It's sort of that it's that inner sense that you have, that connection to, sort of what is moral, what is ethical. And I was like, "What? So you mean like God is your conscience?" And he said, "Yes, God is your conscience. God is your conscience." And he started going to all the different classes and saying, "God is your conscience. God is your conscience." Um, and then a few weeks later, they fired him because people were upset. This guy's going around with this very, abstract. They don't tell your kids God is your conscience. You tell them, especially back in the 60s, whatever, you don't tell them. You tell them, God is this guy up in the sky, right? Who looks and watches and this character. And they got rid of him. And I always felt responsible for getting this poor rabbi fired, by, if anything. And I was also asking him what is God as, a kind of an asshole kid trying to, stump the teacher. I think it was less, true theological yearning than, all right, then, if you're going to ask you anything, what's God? And then it led to his downfall.
Well, I mean, you decided what that almost from that point you would help people to see. I think you said the innate order of things. There's a natural ethic which is beyond social construction. Was that sort of led on to a lot of your other work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was, I didn't quite know how to say it yet. I didn't know about, computer programming or open source or any of the great models we have now for, bottom up collaborative world design. But at the time, it seemed to me that, yeah, that uh, that this sort of agreed upon model for how things are that nobody really believes, but everybody accepts out of some weird convenience or because they're paid to or because the power people say to, that those constructions are actually standing in the way of whatever the real thing is. So you could look at almost anything. So now I look at, well, money. Right? So money is this agreed upon thing that's actually an obstacle to distributed wealth. You know, God, as we conceive it, is this obstacle to uh, shared spiritual grounding and connection. So each of the things, each of the institutions that we erect tend to be these right socially constructed uh, barriers to the thing that they purport to express.
Yeah, and even like from what's it called? Even sort of the stories which we see like in our day to day. I mean, I've been this has come up a couple of times in sort of different ways, but the Aristotle narrative. I mean, it's been explained what is the hero's journey, the Aristotle narrative. Could you explain? This is the Aristotle narrative has been used for thousands of years, and it's still being used today by brands and advertising, isn't it? Like, what is it for anyone who doesn't know exactly what that is?
Well, it's weird, oddly enough, like Torah and Bible kind of predate the Aristotelian narrative, and they're different. It's weird. You don't generally see like a Bible character, that guy was hoisted on his own petard, or that was Moses's tragic flaw, and therefore he was brought down. You don't see that, crisis climax relief that you get,
So that's
that
what it is. Just for anyone who doesn't know, the Aristotle narrative, what the hero's journey is, you start with a character, you get to know them, and then they have this moment of challenge or something where they get up to a point, climax, what's going to happen, they solve it or whatever happens, and then it's the release afterwards. That's what it is.
Right.
That arch.
Exactly. You just create a character the audience likes. That character has a series of challenges that put him into more and more danger until he or she gets into the worst possible situation where it looks like there's no way out, and then the character finds a solution. Whether it's Oedipus realizes as he killed his own father. Arnold Schwarzenegger finds a gun. The kid in the acne commercial, finds the tube of Clearasil to kill the pimples. Whatever it is, and then relief. So crisis, climax, relief. This sort of male orgasm curve of narrative, and we used it for everything from Christian salvation to capitalism to fascism. You keep your eyes on the prize. The ends justify the means, and you march together till you get to that place, and then yay, the great thing happens. And that really worked well in sort of literary culture and book culture, where your audience was captive and where your medium was really linear. You could move from beginning to middle to end. When your audience isn't captive, they're not as willing to go up into danger with your character. They're not as willing to oh, don't go in that room. Oh, don't do that thing. Oh, to just switch the channel, just go. Or you're fast forward and back, and in a very disjointed media space. Particularly when the narrative arc is being used by an advertiser or a politician or someone you don't trust, you really don't want to stay for it. I don't want to sit through this anxiety in order to find out what pill I'm supposed to take. And you go. So as we got used to escaping narrative, our storytellers, even the ones who didn't mean us harm, had to find sort of these other ways of conveying meaning. So, and that's where in the really the 80s and early 90s, you start to see, television shows like The Simpsons, which help you make sense based much more on pattern recognition than on getting to the end of the story, right? So you're not worried about, will Homer get out of the nuclear power plant before it blows up? You're watching it really in more of a scene to scene to scene way. Oh, this scene satirizing MTV, and that scene satirizing this commercial, and that scene satirizing Alfred Hitchcock, so that the endorphin release, the catharsis, I guess is what you'd call it, that you would normally get only at the very end. Now you're getting as this sort of series of pattern recognitions along the way, which is, a way more positive form of narrative in some ways. It's not crisis, climax, completion. It's not beginning, middle, end, and death. It's not these are not kinds of stories like wars where you have to go out, find the enemy, struggle with them, and kill them in order for the story to end. This is much more a kind of sustainable, open-ended narrative, much more like a fantasy role-playing game than a football game that you just win. And that is so much more helpful in a world where we're looking for sustainable solutions to problems, not just victories against, the raiding hordes of enemies.
Yeah, and it's much more, yeah, much more consistent with real life and the lives
Right.
we live. And because you were saying like
And
it's
that's
like,
why, I mean, and that's why, and it turned out, I thought religion would be the biggest, hardest, craziest one of those to unearth, that narrative. And it turns out it's not. It turns out it's business and economics. That's the one. I mean, well, duh, of course. What are the rich going to defend more desperately than anything else? Their vision of God or their money? Right? It's going to be their money. So, but it's the same problem, so now people start companies in order to sell them, right? You start the company, and the IPO, where you get on the stock market, or the acquisition where Google or Facebook buys you, is seen as the end of the story, the goal, the climax, the thing that we're moving towards. And that's not why you start a company. You should start a company because you like doing this thing, because you have something of value to other people. And you're not going to develop your company the same way. If you're developing it to sell it, you're going to do very different things and make very different choices than if you're developing it as an ongoing, almost family enterprise, something that you're going to do for the rest of your life. Uber is not being designed by people who want to stay with that company, right? Uber is being designed by people who want to do the evil they have to do now in order to get an absolute platform monopoly, and then sell the fucker to Wall Street and get out of there with a few $1 billion. That's the object of the game here. If they were actually thinking, how can we create ride service and sharing in a way that will help promote community activity and develop local economies, and you know it would be a very different company, wouldn't it?
talking about the Uber thing, that's interesting because I totally hear your point just there. But then, would you say it then because it's the rise of the peer-to-peer, the sharing economy? I mean, is that like, would you not say that's more of a step in the right direction at least because it's more collaborative, or do you think actually, I don't know, as in I'm just thinking out loud when you're saying that, because at least it's the whole, I know, I mean peer-to-peer sharing economy, like it's suddenly like the collective rather than it being this one monopoly in charge of effing. Well, I guess it is there at the same time. I don't
It is,
know.
though. It's a
Yeah, it is. It
monopoly,
is
and
though,
it
isn't it?
extracts it leverages the new peer-to-peer uh, uh, ethos, but it does that in order to extract value from those exchanges. So Uber could be a tiny little app that facilitates all this activity without taking out a lion's share of the profit. It could actually exist, it could exist along with other little apps that do the same thing. It wouldn't have to be the only one, right? It wouldn't have to use its billions of dollars of venture capital in order to undercut all the enemies, in order to dominate a market, right? The object of the game for Uber should not be to put local cabs out of business. It should be to compete effectively with them. And that doesn't mean it's not a real part of any kind of economic ecosystem. It's an invader, and
So it's that
that's
it's that
very
prize.
different.
It's the victory. It's the goal at the end, as opposed to yeah. And what
Right,
is
and it
the
has a scorched earth. It's a scorched earth approach. It's the way that, there was a company called Clear Channel that destroyed the FM radio dial in America. And it did it, they bought all the stations, and they replaced all the DJs with computers and did everything from one place. There was no more local radio. And then they realized, oh, we can't make money on this. And they tried to sell it all back, but it was gone. The ecosystem was gone. You can't just rebuild a culture that took, 50 years to create. You can't just, recreate it.
yeah? And what is the Greeks? The Greeks had two different words, didn't they, for timing? They had chronos, like time on the clock, and kairos, I
Uh-huh.
think. I've never heard of this differentiation before. What was that?
Yeah, well, that's why I was talking a lot about that when I wrote Present Shock, which really looks at that there's there they had two understandings of time, where Chronos is just the time that we know, like time on the clock. What time did you crash the car? I crashed the car at 4:17. And this other word for time, which is kairos, which is more like readiness or human time. And that would be, what time do you tell dad that you crashed the car? 4:21? No, you tell dad that you crashed the car, after he's had his drink and before he's opened the bills. So that's kairos. That's sort of human time. It's a time that's much more based on on kind of that readiness, that Hamlet idea of the readiness is all. It's a softer, squishier understanding of time. And what we've done, I mean, through digital technology and largely through the economy, our economic understanding of time, we understand chronos. You know, oh, I've got this much time. I'm going to sell you these 3 hours for these $3. You know, we understand time in that segmented way, but we've lost touch with the actual human time. So if you spend time with someone, I mean, maybe Skype is sort of halfway between, but you know, the time you spend uh, uh, on Facebook or doing email and all is almost all Chronos type time. It's very digital, it's very surrendered to something. And you don't get to experience, you know, Kairos, which is much more like the sort of eye-to-eye contact, the rhythms of nature, the forming rapport and breathing with a person and seeing his pupils open. You know, that's where all this kind of Kairos can happen. And I just find that with so many of these technologies, we justify them as time saving, but they're actually time killing because they amplify chronos. Oh, you did this in 7 seconds instead of 7 minutes, but they kill the kairos of the 7 minutes that you got to spend with someone else. You know, so the example I always use for it is these Real Housewives shows in the States where these women can't communicate at all. And I realized the reason why it's about these basically these old wealthy women of various cities like Beverly Hills, and they do these reality shows about them. And the shows amount to these women fighting and having misunderstandings. And it's because these women have put so much Botox into their faces, they've done so much plastic surgery that they can't make facial expressions that match the things that they're saying, so that everyone thinks they're lying. You know, so one woman says, "Oh, my daughter's going in for cancer testing," and the other one says, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." And the first one thinks that she's lying because she's smiling while she's saying it, but she has to smile because her face is frozen. So these women, in trying to lock down their faces at sort of age 29 Kairos or age 29 Chronos, right? That moment, they've made themselves unavailable to the Kairos, to the real moment that they're actually in, right? So they're worshiping Chronos and forgetting about Kairos. And that's really the problem with the way we're implementing our technologies is in order to amplify the metrics of time and time saving, but we're losing the human time of our lives. We actually have less time than we used to.
Well, this is one of the sort of the big like reasons. One of the there's a few, but one of the big reasons why I actually want to talk to you because one in these interviews, I mean, I've lost track of how many times being being present, being in the moment, be in the now, like it's just come up in talking to different people, different backgrounds, professions, careers, countries. This is a theme that's come up again and again and again. But it was something talking about. But there's this difference, like you were talking about, being the difference of being of the moment is not the same as being in the moment. And what you're saying there, like being on our phone buzzes and suddenly we've got like a tweet, a text, that is in the moment, but that's not this sort of Zen Taoist what we're saying of being in the here and now. There's a big difference, isn't there? Because you're focused,
Well,
you are in the moment, you're not living in the past, the present. You're very much interested in your tweet, but that's not the sort of end result, is it?
your tweet's not in the true present, right? Your tweet just happened somewhere. It was in someone else's present, right? So the irony is people think they're catching up, with these streams, these streams of news updates or tweets or SMS messages, but those messages are trying to keep up with you. You're in the present and they're all back there. So are you trying to keep up with the past is bizarre, but there's all these weird time shiftings that happen online. You go on Facebook and you've got friends from second grade that you've been trying to get away from for the last 30 years. Then they pop up wanting to be in your present with equal say as everybody else. And that's not fair. The past is supposed to recede. I've spent so long getting away from that past. You're allowed to be in this present. And then Mark Zuckerberg is advertising your future to you that you don't even know you're going to live yet, right? He's using the data trail you've left behind to do big data analysis and find out if you're going to go on a diet, if you're going to decide you're gay, if you're going to get married, if you're going to get erectile dysfunction. He knows what's coming. So you start get in your ads, you're getting advertisements from a future you haven't yet even gotten to. If you're even going to go there, there's a 10-20% chance that you would have gone somewhere else. But now they're really trying to force you to be true to your profile. So in both senses, whether it's the messages coming from your past or the messages coming from your future, the technology is trying to make you more predictable, you more consistent with your profile, with your segment, and that's life killing, right? So you will step off into the real world. You're not missing anything. When you're missing something is when you're engaging with these, algorithmically preordained messaging systems.
Rather than
But
saying sort of like, if I'm sat at home and thinking, whatever, like technology is bad, or complaining about how people's attention spans are getting less and less, real life human interaction is on the decrease, what kind of practical things, what kind of things do you think we can do? Like, how can we use technology in a positive way?
well, I mean, I would use technology to promote your real world experiences rather than to substitute for them. So it's a matter of use your email to find a time to meet somebody, and then be with them, and understand that, yeah, this is great for you in Sri Lanka to talk to me in New York. That's what you use this for. If you were here, if you lived in my town, this would be really dumb, right? The technologies are great for your. I still see them as productivity tools. So as a creative person, it was great to make music, to write books, to draw pictures, to disseminate your creative activity. But um, I don't see them as substitutes for the social reality. There's a social element, which is great. The social element really works best when you use them in a time shifted way. I haven't seen anything better yet than what we used to call Usenet. It was these discussions, or the BBS, a bulletin board. A good discussion between people can happen in this space. It used to be a place where people were smarter or sounded smarter than they did in real life because they took so much time to craft each paragraph. And now, it's this sort of Donald Trump inane, Twitter, cell phone stuff. It's just like, don't. The stuff we think about most, we consider the most, is the stuff we say to some other person in real life. And the stuff we don't even consider before we send it out to 20,000 people is the crap that we type into this angry and go bam. So which part of you are you amplifying, and which part of you are you repressing?
Another thing I found quite fascinating was because a lot of the focus is obviously your expertise on media, digital technology, but I heard you discuss about the natural rhythms of the day, circadian rhythms, lunar cycles, and actually how understanding these basic things can actually offer us amazing opportunities. Could you maybe just explain a bit more about that, and maybe a personal example how you've learned and maybe applied some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, when we get completely stuck into Chronos, or as time, or even the market, and money as the sort of the grid on which we live and organize our lives, and we do, shift labor where you might work at night 3 days a week and day 2 days a week, you end up disconnecting yourself from the rhythms that the human organism has been using to modulate itself since we were, one-celled animals. So whether it's, you see plants open and close in the day and the night, or certain animals know that it's night and then they get up. There's lots and lots of internal rhythms of biological clocks in you that regulate your hormones and everything. I mean, we know women, every 28 days they have a cycle. that's not coincidence, right? It's 28 days. Oh, maybe it has something to do with the moon. It's the way that we time ourselves, the way that so that things happen. And when you're in sync with those natural biological clocks, when you're aware of them, then it's no longer like, oh, I'm in a bad mood today, I don't understand why, or oh, I'm feeling vulnerable today, I don't understand why. It's because these are natural, very natural cycles. So most of us know sort of day and night. We understand that day is really good for doing stuff and night's kind of good for sleeping because it's all dark out. And that melatonin and things all adjust with the light. And we know that if you use a computer late at night, you don't sleep as well because you've fooled your body into thinking that it's looking in sunlight or something. So we know about that. But then there's also rhythms like the lunar rhythm. And if you look at a person over the 28-day lunar cycle, I mean, a lot of the ancient civilizations seem to understand this, that each week of the lunar cycle is kind of dominated by a different neurotransmitter. So, without getting into all the details now, you have a week of acetylcholine, a week of serotonin, a week of dopamine, and then a week of norepinephrine. And if you understand which neurotransmitter is the dominant one, then you understand kind of what the week is good for. If you're in a dopamine week, that's a party week, that's a ski week, that's a relax. If you're in a acetylcholine week, it's good for beginning things and seeing what's going on. A norepinephrine week, you're going to be really analytical and kind of cold. It's that sort of fight or flight, uh, uh, almost winter of of time. So, and it's this sort of four-part cycle, whether it's a four-part breath or four seasons. You start to understand that there are these four components, these four profiles, even four kinds of people, corresponding to each of those weeks, each of those seasons. So for me, when I looked at the lunar calendar, I was like, well, why don't I try to adjust my work to be that way? It's really hard to, but it's easier as a freelancer in some ways because you can say, okay, serotonin week, I'm going to do most of my work. Dopamine week, I'm going to relax. Norepinephrine week, I'm going to organize my chapters and make my battle plan. Acetylcholine week, I'm going to meet new people, do interviews, try to read and be exposed to new ideas. And my productivity went up when I decided I'd only really be writing 1 week of that month because I was sort of rediscovering um, those cycles. But it's hard if you're living in a city and living on the schedule of some company for when you work and have to get stuff done. You're screwed up. But if companies even understood these, I mean, God forbid they won't. If companies understood it, then they would know, oh, this is the week we advertise. This is the week we try to get people to do this. They could exploit the very same things. I don't know if it would be so bad though, because at least they'd be conforming to the sort of human empowering rhythms rather than just trying to squash them.
So interesting. I mean, I've never heard it described like that before, and so that's just made me think. When you were describing that, that just made me think. Okay, I'm gonna delve into that a bit more. I'm gonna start learning
Yeah,
about
but
this.
you look at interesting research. They're afraid to do it with humans now, but there's a lot of research that the furniture makers in Europe, they cut down trees depending on which week of the lunar cycle it is, because the pores of the wood are open during certain weeks of the lunar cycle and much more closed during another one. And so if you cut down when they're open, then the more the sap comes out, or they dry faster, or something like that. Or if you want them closed, then you could. So even I mean, people have known these things for thousands of years. It's just uh, whether we accept that human beings are uh, part of nature, that we're and that that the key to progress may not be trying to continually ignore and override these kind of core commands, but learning how to play with them.
I love that. What do you say a fulfilled life means to you?
I don't know. I don't know. Fulfilled life is a life where I would say connected with the other people. Where you realize that you're really on team human. Is what I've been calling it, and that the other ones are here to play with. Not to compete against on a fundamental level, and then that to kind of grope towards whatever that collective awareness, collaborative thing is that I would hope that we are evolving towards.
And what's one thing all our listeners can do today that will have a massive positive effect on their lives?
Oh, just look into someone else's eyes, for real. That's it,
Simple. Last but not least, how can people stay in touch, find out more about you and your work?
I guess Rushkoff.com is my website, and they could buy my book. I can show. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to look like that.
That's out next month, yeah?
Yeah, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. You could buy that. It's a life-affirming look at how the startup industry is trying to ruin us all. But there's it's about the retrieval of all these great kind of medieval mechanisms for peer-to-peer exchange that have been repressed for 600 years and are coming back now. I mean, Spirit Pig is obviously an example of.
Am I in the book? I mean, is that chapter what? Chapter 5, chapter 7? It's all about Spirit Pig.
You are the book. Just
Thank you. I'm so honored.
It. The spirit of the pig is just in between the lines.
Douglas, I really appreciated this. Thank you so much for speaking to me today. It's been fun.